What is up, guys? Welcome back to another tier list for FTL Faster Than Light. So many people have requested a sectors tier list, so I went ahead and made one because people wanted it, and I love making tier lists, and I'm trying to squeeze every ounce of content out of FTL tier lists that I can because there are not that many. Again, I did a music one, I did a ship one, I did a weapons one, drones, races, augments. If there's anything left, let me know. But I cannot. I can't think. It's just gonna have to be more silly stuff like the music tier list. But either way, we are here with the FTL sector tier list. Um, I'm a little bit, confused how this is gonna work because the tier list or the sectors are kind of hard to quantify since they vary so much based on like what events you get and the RNG you get, obviously. Um, So, having said that, this is mostly just my opinion of if I'm in my ship in FTL and I see two options, how likely am I to decide to go to this sector over whatever the other option is? How detrimental could it be to my ship? How beneficial could it be to my ship? How easy is it versus how much reward you get? There's a lot of things that go into it, so it's going to be very opinion based. Some people are going to disagree, and I'm ready for the brigade in the comments. But I want to hear what you guys think about this, and I'm doing this mostly for new players who are like, should I go to this sector? Is it worth it? Blah, blah, blah. So having said all that, let's get started here. I don't know what the order is. I did not put it in this order, but whatever. We're going to start with the civilian sector here. Civilian sectors are traditionally the easiest sectors in the game, um, mostly because there's just not a lot of enemy ships. And this is something that's common with a lot of the friendly sectors. Yes, they are easier, meaning you will probably not die as likely, that is, but you will get less rewards because there are less enemy ships to fight. So this is a big thing when considering what sectors to go to. You know, if you're low on health and you need something like a store or just not a lot of combat for a little bit, go to a friendly sector by all means. But keep in mind that it can bite you in the ass in the long run when you don't have that much scrap because you missed out on a ton of events. Um, Having said that, the civilian sector is pretty good, just for a nice, easy route. But I think the other easy sectors or green sectors, friendly, whatever you want to call them, are a little bit better. I'm going to put this solidly in the B tier. I respect it, one, because it has 2 to 3 shops, which means you're more likely to find a store, which obviously is good. But just the offset of not being able to get into combat, which obviously sounds counterintuitive, kind of puts it down a bit just because you need to get in fights to win FTL. You need to get scrap and you need to blow up ships or board them, whatever. And just running into a bunch of friendly stuff is not going to help you. Plus, there's no like special events. I mean, I think there are some, but that's another thing about it. I don't have all the events memorized, where they take place, what happens in all of them. I mean, I mostly do, but like I'm not going to be able to recall that for all of this. So there's going to be stuff I miss, and I'm sure people will point out like, dude, how could you forget in the civilian sector you can beat the game instantly, right? Look, there's a lot of events in FTL, which is awesome and why I love the game. So I'm going to forget some stuff here and there, but we're going to start with civilian and B tier. NG controlled, I think I'm going to bump up to A tier. It has the same problems as the friendly sector, just in general. There's less ships, there's less stuff to do, but the NG controlled is really good because it has a lot of stores. You can still find a decent amount of enemy ships. It's not amazing for that, but there's something to be said about it, and I respect it for having stores and a relatively easy time for players to get through. I will say the NG are probably one of the easier races to fight. You can get unlucky and you can get like the crazy ships that have hella drones and you just get that you can't do any damage to them, which is annoying, right? But overall, NG aren't that bad. If they board you, first of all, why? Secondly, they're NG, so you can just mop the floor with them. The drones usually aren't that bad. If you get walled by drones, unless it's one of those super duper ships, then you got problems. So you shouldn't really have too much problem dealing with the NG here. But yeah, that's NG controlled. NG Homeworlds here, I think I'm also going to put an A, kind of for the same reasons. You can get the virus event, which is super good, but that doesn't elevate it enough to be an S tier, I don't think. Considering that event is like completely random and you might not get it, / you probably won't get it unless you get super lucky, right? Um, it's still a good sector to go to. It's relatively peaceful. You get decent combat. There's good events overall. You can get the medbot dispersal in either of these, I think, actually. You can get the medbot dispersal, which is an okay augment. And you can get the virus event in the Homeworlds, which is always good, in my opinion, to get that super kitted out crewmate. And he's an NG, so you just repair things at lightning speed. Definitely a good sector. Not necessarily the best of all time, but pretty good. Zoltan controlled and Zoltan Homeworld. So this is hard for me. As someone going through the game, there's a lot to consider when you come up against a Zoltan sector. Zoltan shields can ruin runs if they're on enemy ships, because depending on the build that the enemy ship has, if it has a Zoltan shield and then like a crazy burst laser Mark II halberd ion burst, you're done. Like, that's insane. So much of FTL is dependent on getting your first volley off, disabling maybe their weapons or whatever so they can't hit you with their full blast, and then going from there. And if the Zoltan shield blocks 5 projectiles of yours, they can have so much more time to get souped up and just get the ball rolling on their end. So that can be a lot of trouble for new players and returning players. It's a pain in the ass, frankly. I will say though, Zoltan Homeworlds houses the Zoltan Peace Envoy event, which allows you to get another kind of envoy who's kind of like the virus. He's fully kitted, but even better, a Zoltan shield yourself. It is the only way other than playing as a Zoltan ship to get a Zoltan shield. So that has to elevate it quite a bit. I can't put it in S tier because it's not. It's a pain in the ass to go to this. Well, does it go in B tier? Dude, look, here's the thing. The Zoltan shield event is really, really good. But when I see a Zoltan Homeworlds, more often than not, I'm like, I'd kind of rather not go there. You know, they got the stores. They're peaceful, quote unquote. But dude, the Zoltan shields, especially later in the game, can be super dangerous. And I feel pretty much the same about the Zoltan controlled. Zoltan Homeworlds, for what it's worth, is slightly higher because it has the Zoltan shield event, but they're still both really difficult for being a friendly sector. It's a bit off-putting. Okay, so let's move on to the hostile sectors here. You might be surprised. These are not always worse than the green sectors, in my opinion. In fact, a lot of them are better. Let's start with, we'll start with the Rebel Stronghold. So the Rebel Stronghold is super rare. It's a kind of a unique sector. You don't really come across it that often, but it is pretty difficult because it has a ton of crazy souped up rebel ships and stuff like that. And the prototype flagship is there actually, which is kind of a secret, so spoiler, sorry. But if you do find that and you beat it, you actually unlock the Federation cruiser, and that can be really good. So if you do find this is kind of fun to go to because it's such a novel niche sector, much like the crystal ones. A little less secret, but still pretty cool. But it's pretty difficult. So again, this is not how much I like the sector, but how much I recommend going there. I really, unless you are a really good player, in which case you probably don't need to see this tier list, or at least for any like meaningful tips. But you should avoid the Rebel Stronghold. It's gonna be difficult. It's gonna be insane. Usually comes pretty late in the run. There's just no reason to go to it unless you have to. So yeah, I think it's gonna sit in D tier in terms of when you should actually consider going to it. Okay, rock controlled. So rock controlled is not that bad. Rock Homeworlds can be a pain in the ass. Rock controlled. So the rock sectors have a lot more asteroid fields. It's kind of their thing. Asteroid fields are kind of, in my opinion, the least dangerous, like, what are they called? Environmental hazard, assuming you have any degree of shields. The suns put you on this crazy timer where you got fires cropping up over your ship. It can be a pain in the ass. Don't even get me started on the pulsars, dude. Those things are nightmares. So asteroids aren't that bad. The biggest thing you have to consider when you go to these sectors is what are the ships going to have? The Zoltan ships are going to have their shields, right? Of course. Rocks are going to have tons of missiles, and they're going to have rock hull on their ship because that's just what they have. The rock hull is annoying. It's never really that big of a deal. Sometimes, you know, they're on their last HP and they resist it, and you're like, God damn it, I needed them to die. But usually it's not that big of a deal, in my opinion. So I'm gonna put rock controlled in A as well. They're, for the rewards you get, because it's a hostile sector, right? Blowing up so many ships, it's not that difficult, in my opinion. I don't think it's really that bad. The missiles are, you know, depending on when you run into this sector, if you've got a defense drone or you got cloaking, you can dodge a lot of missiles and make a lot of rock ships not really that threatening. The thing to consider if you're boarding, obviously a rock controlled sector can be a little dangerous because of their HP, or if you're using fire weapons, this sector is pretty much immune to your whole strategy. So keep that in mind if you have one of those more niche kind of builds. But overall, the rock controlled really is not that bad. Rock Homeworlds is probably a little worse, but they're kind of the same. You can find some more events and stuff, and there's just more rock ships, but it's a little worse, I would say, to go to. In general, Homeworlds tend to be more difficult than just controlled sectors. For anyone wondering, it's hard to compare all of these sectors, right? Just because like if you get good events and you get lucky, and the ships, even not even events, the ships themselves vary so much because it's there's RNG, it's a roguelite. So sometimes you get some crazy rock ships that are just a pain in the ass, right? But I don't think either rock controlled or rock homeworlds are that dangerous to go to in comparison to the other hostile sectors. Like a Mantis controlled sector, I'm going to put Mantis controlled in C tier. They can be pretty difficult because Mantis boards you, right? That's kind of their thing. Plus, Mantis are just super tanky. If you don't have a great defensive crew, you don't have a ton of crew moving around able to fight, it could be really difficult to deal with the Mantis. And you get boarded by a couple of these things, oh baby, you're in trouble. That actually brings me back. There's a couple of, it doesn't really have to do with the sectors, but if you get boarded by the Quad Zoltan event, that's a pain in the ass. But that doesn't really have to do with the sectors, I guess. But anyways, yeah, Mantis controlled, it can be pretty difficult with them boarding. It's not as bad as the Homeworlds, which we'll get to in a second, but boarding generally is really dangerous. If you just get boarded solo, it's not that bad. But if you get boarded while fighting a ship, especially a souped up Mantis ship, some of those ones are crazy. So it can really throw a wrench in your run. And Mantis Homeworlds are going to go in D tier. They are pretty difficult. Again, if you got a hang of the game, this tier list isn't quite as meaningful because you can usually build around stuff and you know what to expect. But for someone who's learning the game more or trying to figure out, it's really best to just avoid the Mantis Homeworlds if you can. When I first played the game, I pretty much exclusively would go to green sectors, unless I had to go to a red sector to begin with. And it took me a while to get a win, right? But once you realize that going to red sectors is actually pretty important to get enough scrap to build your run and have it snowball and able to win the game, you can prioritize which red sectors to go to, and it's not that bad. Steering clear of Mantis ones is definitely a good shout. All right, so welcome to our first S tier sector. I think pirate controlled are some of the best sectors to go to. Couple reasons. One, pirates are historically they're not that bad. They're kind of just a bunch of dumbasses floating in space junk most of the time. They don't really have too much going for them. But there's a ton of cool events that you can find. I mean, you can find them elsewhere as well. But like, for example, the slaver events, you get the pirates trying to pay their toll, right? Who does that? And the ships really aren't that bad. So you can get a lot of combat events to get a lot of scrap built up, but not have to worry so much about super game-breaking, intense ships. Pirate ships are really not that bad most of the time. They don't have any special stuff like Zoltan shields or boarding. They're just kind of ships, right? Rebel controlled, I kind of see the same way, to be honest. I can't remember every single event again, but most of the time I run into a rebel ship, they're pretty garbage. You find a lot of like, oh, it's a rebel scout. They're trying to run from you. Those ships are terrible. They have like one burst laser Mark 1 and then an anti-drone drone. What do they expect to do to your ship? So you get these combat events that let you build up scrap and resources and potential like free items and stuff like that, and you don't really have that much to go against. I think these are some of the better sectors to go to in general. The difficulty offset by how much money you actually get is really manageable. So I think these are, as far as red sectors go, are good ones to hit. Abandoned sector, I got to put in the D tier. Although I love the music in these sectors, they are so difficult. This might be the most difficult sector in the game, other than, well, I don't even know why I put Last Stand on here, but whatever, we'll get to that in a sec. Abandoned sectors are crazy. You got Lanius, right? They always seem to have boarding on their ships, which is not even, that's like the Mantis thing, but whatever. They got boarding. They board over the Lanius. You can't vent them. They suffocate you. Pain in the ass. The Lanius' signature weapon are flat guns, which we all know. Flat guns are just OP. So you get bopped by that, and they tend to have a lot of missiles, and their ships are just threatening in general. They always have hacking. They always have clone base, so it's a pain in the ass to like deal with. It's just, everything about them is insanely difficult. If you find one super early, like Sector 2 or 3, you can maybe go to it and be all right. But after that, you should really, really hardcore avoid these. They can be so difficult, and for just no reason. Like, they're just a pain in the ass. I would definitely recommend avoiding abandoned sectors unless absolutely necessary, especially later in the game. All right, last stand. I mean, you can't really avoid it. uh, I guess I'll just put it in B tier. I don't know why I put this on here. It's difficult, but you usually just make a beeline to the flagship. So, yeah, whatever. Not much to be said about that. Okay, now onto the nebulas. Nebulas, before I go into them, are very hit or miss. Usually nebulas are bad because they have a couple of mechanics that make them strange, right? When you find a nebula in a normal sector, it cuts the fleet's jump down by half, as I'm sure many of you know. However, in a nebula sector, it does not do that. I guess it would be too overpowered. But it does cut the rebel fleet down by a third. So the rebel fleet in in a nebula sector moves slower, but not as slow as, you know, say one that you just find regularly, right? So this means you can get more jumps out of your time in a nebula, which is obviously good because it means more scrap. The catch is nebula sectors have less events just in general. And that can make it so that you kind of waste your time there anyways. Even though you get more jumps, you just don't get as much stuff. So if you have advanced scanners, right, this can be a really good decision going to a nebula because you will know where all the ships are that you can hit and get the bonuses from, right? Even still, it's a little bit whack, but I would say unless you have scanners, nebulas are just they're not that hard. Well, at least an Uncharted nebula is not that hard. It's just a matter of they're kind of pointless. You don't get a lot of rewards, and it doesn't really move the needle for you that much in general. I'm going to put them in C tier, but just because they're, like I said, they're not that difficult per se. They're just kind of a waste. Slug controlled nebulas, I'm going to put in B tier. They're kind of the same deal. They just have more ships and like more combat. There's so many just empty ass beacons and like beacons in nebulas where you get boarded and you're like, great, I didn't even get anything. I got like, you know, some combat skill. Great. Slug controlled nebulas still not great, but a little bit better. And then slug home nebulas are probably going to go down to C again because you can find some crazy difficult slug ships. You know, if they have mind control, hacking, cloaking, some of these ships are insane. And some of them have a ton of crew as well. If you have sensors upgraded, you can see. Or sorry, if you have like a slug yourself or you board, whatever. Sensors don't work in a nebula. But you can find some crazy difficult ships, and it can be pretty dangerous, especially later in the game if you run into one of these sectors. So I would say probably it's best to avoid nebulas as a whole unless you have advanced scanners, and even then they're still kind of like difficult. Sometimes like I'll jump into a nebula, be ready to go with my scanners, and then there's just no ships near me anyways, and I just look like an idiot. Okay. And finally on the Crystal Worlds. Now the Crystal Worlds is like a super duper secret sector. You'd like never go there unless you're trying to. But crystal ships are kind of dangerous. It's again kind of hard to rank just because anyone who's like new to the game and needs help, you know, figuring out sectors and stuff like that, you're never gonna find one of these. I think I'm gonna put it in B tier for that reason. They're very crystal ships can be difficult because their weapons all have piercing. But I mean, like, yeah, I don't think it's not that bad if you go. It's always fun. It's interesting. It's cool. You know, it's not really in contention for something you'll commonly see in a run. Even the Rebel Stronghold you'll see way more often than the Crystal Worlds for obvious reasons. But yeah, let me take a look at this list one more time. Like I said, this list is kind of hard to compile just because like my opinions are just how I play the game, and it varies so much based on how other people will play. You know, certain events, like if I could go to a Zoltan Homeworlds and get the Zoltan shield every time, this would be an S tier sector because I would, you know, the trade-off of getting a Zoltan shield for the difficulty of Zoltan shields in combat is worth it, but you can't guarantee stuff like that. So there's a lot of variability here. This is not law. This is just me as someone with a couple hundred hours in the game who makes YouTube videos, what I think of it. So yeah, let me know what you guys thought in the comments. Big takeaways from this: do not be scared of red sectors. Know which ones to pick because they're not all that bad, and know which ones to avoid because you can maximize your scrap, and that allows you to come out when you get to the flagship with a good amount of upgrades, a good amount of gear, and not be super underpowered by just going to these 5 green sectors. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if there's more tier lists you want to see. I mean, for FTL, but also for other stuff. Like, you know, I could rank all the Pokemon or something like that. I love making tier lists, and if you guys like seeing them, I'm happy to make more for what it's worth. So thank you guys so much for watching. and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks.